welcome everybody. On behalf of the Department of Russian and Slavic Studies and the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russian here at New York University, my name is Elliot Borenstein. I am a professor in the Department of Russian and Slavic Studies and interim vice provost and vice chancellor for global programs here at the university. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Anna Frajlich, also known as Anna Frajlich, who I was surprised when I was born in Kyrgyzstan, but grew up in Poland and has lived in New York since 1970. She received her MA from Warsaw University in Polish Literature and defended her PhD dissertation in this very department, the Slavic department of New York University in 1990. The PhD program here in our department was closed down in 1980, and I believe Anna is our very last PhD student from the freestanding program. So
I defended in 1990.
Yes, yes, exactly. Because you were grandmothered in, because you were already in the program. She is a senior lecturer emerita at the Department of Slavic Languages and associate faculty member at the Harriman Institute of Columbia University, where she taught Polish language and literature for over 3 decades. She's the recipient of multiple awards, including in 1991, the Kościelski Foundation of Switzerland Literary Prize, a 2003 Literary Prize from the W.N. Torzynski Foundation in Canada. In 2015, she received a prize from the Union of Polish Writers in Exile based in London. She's the author of 18 books of poetry, 4 of them bilingual Polish-English, Polish-French, Polish-Italian, and Polish-Spanish. In 2002, she received the Knight Cross of the Order of Merit awarded by the President of the Polish Republic. In 2008, she received the honorary title of the Ambassador of Szczecin, Poland, and in 2017, the Distinguished Pole Award in the category of culture, and a medal from the Szczecin University in 2020, where she was also awarded the Jubilee Medal of the John Paul II Catholic University in Lublin, Poland, and many, many, many more distinguished awards. And most recently, she published her book, The Ghost of Shakespeare, Collected Essays, from which today's talk is drawn. It's a wonderful book. I have it in my office. And today's talk is The Ghost of Shakespeare in the Poetry of Wisława Szymborska. So, welcome.
Thank you. I just 2 words. I'm very touched to be invited by NYU, and because that was NYU changed my life. When I many years ago, I came here for some exhibit. At that time, I already published my poems in London and so on. But I was stateless, and I didn't have a job at that point. And I never thought that I would be able to come here, finish the program, and defend the dissertation. And I owe it to Professor Zoya Yuriev, who knew my poems, and we met at that exhibit, and someone introduced me to her, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said I was working in the lab and so on. She said she knew my poems, so she said, "Your place is at the university. Apply, and I will write you recommendation." I didn't know her energy, and that's what happened. I thought I will finish few courses, so they may hire me in some store or something. But no, I finished, and I wrote the dissertation. So I'm very touched to be here. And I wrote a series of examination of different authors and texts with the usage of Shakespeare plot, and here I decided to present The Ghost of Shakespeare in the Poetry of Wisława Szymborska. And that's my essay. The back cover of the 2003 edition of Wisława Szymborska's Light Rhymes for Big Kids sports a publication quotation. Szymborska, don't know her, William Shakespeare. Shakespeare did not know Szymborska, but his ghost visited her on many occasions. While I was studying this phenomenon, I came across Simon Schama's essay, Rembrandt's Ghost, Picasso Looks Back. The author concludes his illuminating article about Picasso taking inspiration in Rembrandt's art. I quote, "Timelessness is not always an empty cliché. It is full of sustaining truth." This is what I'm after, the sustaining truth of Shakespeare's timelessness in the poems Szymborska wrote during the difficult times of the late 50s. The topic of Shakespearean motifs in Polish poetry of that period has huge potential. Once the official adoption of the aesthetics of socialist realism was renounced, poets turned to the images of Shakespeare and Bruegel. Szymborska's The Rest and A Midsummer Night Dream are among two of her most often quoted Shakespearean poems. In the latter poem, the poet does what she does the best, the rearrange the plot. In her acceptance speech for the Goethe Prize, she admitted that, and I quote, "the props are not meaningless." Thus, she replaces the forest of Athens with that of Ardennes, which is the forest in the play of As You Like It, and Shakespeare's native forest. Of all the lovers of this comedy, Szymborska chooses Pyramus and Thisbe, whose story is a mockery of Shakespeare's most romantic tragedy. Romeo and Juliet, thereby underscoring her distance from the topic of love. In Szymborska's version of this Shakespeare's lion is superfluous. Thisbe's coat is not stained with blood, but is radioactive, and one does not need the moon, for it is the forest that shines instead. Szymborska's use of Shakespearean motif has been receiving considerable scholarly attention for some time now. In his monograph on the poetry of Wisława Szymborska, The World in the State of Proofreading, Wojciech Ligenza points out that, and I quote, "the text of Shakespeare is most privileged in Szymborska's dialogue with cultural texts." Among the techniques typical of Szymborska's treatment of the Shakespearean text, Ligenza enumerates transgressing the thread of the drama, transforming the templates of comedy, and writing a new epilogue for Hamlet, as in The Rest, a poem about Ophelia. Again and again, we decode epistemological and metaphysical modification. In Family Album, the poet states, "No one in my family has ever died of love. What happened, happened, but nothing myth-inspiring. Romeo's of consumption, Juliet's of diphtheria, Some have even archival decrepitude. There is but we don't need Polish, right? Okay. It is quite the opposite with the life of Shakespeare, which is myth-inspiring. Here is how Szymborska deals with this myth in her poem Certainty, which opens with a quotation from Act 3, Scene 3 of A Winter's Tale. And I quote, "Thou art certain then our ship had touched upon the deserts of Bohemia." "Oh yeah, my lord, uncertain." This is from Shakespeare, who, I am certain, was none other. A few facts, some data, a portrait almost from his life. This is a poem of Szymborska. To claim this is too little, to wait for proof, the great sea already snatched and cast ashore on the Bohemias of this world. Ligenza comments on this line as follows. The contradictory data about Shakespeare's life are joined to unassertive certainty in the text of the drama. End quotation. The rest is silence, says Hamlet. Szymborska adheres to a similar dichotomy, but she attempts to define what this rest is in the beautiful poem entitled The Rest from her book Salt of 1962. And I quote the English translation. Her mad song over, Ophelia darts out, anxious to check off stage whether her dress is still not too crumpled, whether her blonde tresses from her face as they should. Since real life laws require facts, she, Polonius' true daughter, carefully washes black despair out of her eyebrows and is not above counting the leaves she has combed out of her hair. Oh, may Denmark forgive you, my dear, and me too. I'll die with wings. I'll live on with practical clothes. Non omnis moriar of love. By way of acknowledging that our access to Ophelia is solely through the actress playing the part, the poet shows us the actress off stage, where she takes off her costume and washes off her despair along with her makeup. This practical and mundane act of the part of the actress, on the part of the actress, reminds us that she and each and every one of us possesses both wings, symbolizing the ethereal part of our nature, and the clothes that represent our practical earthly nature. Wings may lead to our demise, as they did for Icarus, while the clothes assure our physical survival. She deconstructs the typical perception of Ophelia, thus reminding us that as Polonius' daughter, she was bound to inherit some traits from him as well. The true nature of the character is revealed on stage and off. This is how the poet teaches us to be wary of stereotypes. Anna Legerzyńska in her book Wisława Szymborska, gives another reading of this poem. I quote, the antinomy of theater and life interests Szymborska not as a conflict of fiction and truth, but as a relation between the model and the effort to overcome the limitation of human nature. In his interpretation of this poem, Ligenza writes, Szymborska added an epilogue to Hamlet in the manner of the postmodern theater, which shatters the illusion of the stage. Another scholar who looks more deeply into Szymborska's Shakespeare motifs is Tadeusz Różewicz, who writes in his book 22 times Szymborska, that's the title. I quote, earlier, when I was writing about some of her poems, I tried to place them directly in front of the Shakespearean mirror, because I am convinced that every serious literature that wants to speak about the essence of the world somehow, somewhere, has to meet up with Shakespeare. Różewicz ascribes this role by implication even to poems that do not have an obvious link to Shakespearean text. He sees Shakespeare fingerprints even on such poems as Conversation with a Stone and Theater Impressions. Per Arne Bourdain, in his essay, The Sixth Act, on Szymborska's poem, Theater Impressions, examines the theater as, and I quote, a recurring theme in Szymborska's poetry. He comments on the topos of theater as life and the reverse of life as theater, end of quotation. Sorry for my pronunciation, I hope you understand what I'm saying. What interests me is the inter-textual relation between Szymborska's poems and Jan Kott essays on Shakespeare, since they both underwent a transformation in their thinking, as did writers who had been seduced by ideology during the Stalinist era after World War II, and later felt the need to cleanse themselves. Michiko Kakutani, reviewing Harold Bloom's Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, for the New York Times, states that Bloom's book, and I quote, Kakutani, echoes the pioneering work of the Polish critic Jan Kott, whose famous 1964 book, Shakespeare, Our Contemporary, illuminated the modernity of the bard. Mr. Kott, actually was professor, demonstrated how Shakespeare tragedies and histories anticipated the violence and cruelty of 20th century history, and more particularly, Eastern Europe's suffering at the hands of Hitler and Stalin, end of quotation. Each generation approaches Shakespeare in its own way. His ghost hovers over the writings of many. I quote, each period creates its own Fortinbras, writes James F. Schlatter in his examination of interwar Polish theater. The generation that came to prominence after the 1956 anti-communist revolt in Poznan, created its own 14 brass as well. The most prominent is the Elegy of 14 brass by Zbigniew Herbert, Szymborska's eminent contemporary, who represented a somewhat different poetics, political, and philosophical stand. In 1956, many writers of Poland and the communist bloc sought the opportunity to free themselves from the confines of ideology, to break away from the monoculture of the Stalinist years. For example, Jan Kott, Tadeusz Różewicz, Wiktor Boroszylski, and Wisława Szymborska, to name only a few from a much longer list. Other writers who had been banned for their lack of ideological zeal were finally given the opportunity to publish their work in the mid-50s. For example, Zbigniew Herbert and Miron Białoszewski, and many others. Irena Makarek, in her interesting book, Shakespeare in the Worlds of Communism and Socialism, writes, I quote, Stalin's death in 1953 initiated the thought in literary policy and sparked Hamlet fever. Hamlet now became a titan conscious and the brother in arms in the battle against residual Stalinism. The Kraków production of Hamlet on September 30th, 1956, marked the turning point for Polish intellectual circles. Jan Kott's review and essays, which eventually made him a world-famous authority on Shakespeare, played a pivotal role in the process of self-examination on the part of intellectuals who subsequently confessed their blindness that had been caused by ideological intoxication and fear. The political scenario in 1956 was Shakespearean in itself. In February, the 20th Congress of the Russian Communist Party with Nikita Khrushchev, secret speech, and its revelation about Stalin's cult of personality. In June, the revolt of Polish workers in Poznan. In September, the production of Hamlet, followed by the Hungarian uprising and the celebrated Polish October that set in motion major political changes. Kott writes, I quote, at the end of September 56, I went to Kraków to see the new production of Hamlet. Shakespeare, Our Contemporary, that's the title of Kott's book, had its beginning in that Polish version of Elsinore, where Denmark is a prison and walls have ears, but people don't. The title of my review was, Kott says the title of my review was Hamlet after the 20th Congress. Szymborska, who lived in Kraków, most probably saw the same production and experienced the excitement surrounding it. The same month, Krystyna Stuszanka, the legendary Polish director, staged Measure for Measure also in Kraków. In her essay about this production, Krystyna Kujawińska-Courtney writes that it was recognized as, and I quote, political morally in the making, and that people from all over Poland came to see it. End of quotation. References to Shakespeare became a code for discussing tyranny in the face of the still rigid censorship. Kott writes, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark" was the first chord of Hamlet's new meaning, and then the dead sounds of the words Denmark's as prison repeated 3 times. Finally, the magnificent churchyard scene with the grave diggers' dialogue rid of metaphysics, brutal and unequivocal. Grave diggers know for whom they dig graves. And I quote, "The gallows is built stronger than the church," they say. I propose to show how certain images that Szymborska borrows from Hamlet in her rehabilitation express her regret and her own ideological blindness. Szymborska has received considerable critical attention since her 3rd volume, Calling Out to Yeti, 1957, which marked her 2nd mature debut. Following the publication of Szymborska's selected poetry in 2000, I published my analysis of rehabilitation in the London-based Polish paper, placing it in the context of Jan Kott's famous interpretation. Originally, Kott was associated with the well-known Marxist periodical Kuźnica. He renounced his Communist Party membership 2 years after he began his Shakespeare studies, where he read Shakespeare as a drama of power called The Grand Mechanism. Szymborska's poem Rehabilitation is an excellent example of such transformation. Arthur Sandauer points to the fact that unlike many of her peers, and I quote Sandauer, Szymborska was able to infer a more general, philosophical, and aesthetic conclusion, while others were sunk in the immediate goals. End of quotation. Though a quite important poem, Rehabilitation is not often quoted or studied. The poem, however, was important to me personally when I first read it in 1957 because of its mysterious and ominous undertone. It was not often included in later collections, and I have not found an English translation. In English, rehabilitation is often used as a medical term, but in Poland, at the time, it signified the restoration of a person's good name to political prisoners who had been falsely accused and persecuted under the Stalinist regime. Both the adversaries of the system and the communists who had been persecuted in the so-called show trial. Szymborska's poem sends me back to this conversation about persons being rehabilitated. On April 20, 1956, some 35,000 political prisoners were released from prison, and 200 who had been killed were rehabilitated. That was only the beginning of the rehabilitation process. The prominent poet Tadeusz Różewicz has a well-known poem with a similar title, Posthumous, rehabilitation. Rehabilitacja pośmiertna. Major images that underlie Szymborska's poem can be traced to Hamlet, which Boris Pasternak, himself a translator of the play, called the drama of obligation and self-denial. That's Pasternak. In the hour of her obligation, Szymborska turned to Shakespeare. In her famous dispute with Yeti, the lyrical eye says, Yeti, we have Shakespeare. We, meaning civilization. She beckons Yeti back, reassuring him that humanity is capable of things other than crime. Yeti is not just crimes that are possible down here. Yeti, not every word is a sentence of death. Such statement in 57 meant just that. We are capable of rehabilitation. The lyrical persona of rehabilitation summons the death even though she does not believe in an afterlife. And I quote, I know that who died, died thoroughly. This ominous image and other images of rehabilitation echo Horatius' words in Act First, Scene First. The dead rise from their graves. End of it. The skull found by the grave digger in the churchyard in Hamlet is that of Yorick, the king's jester. For Lawrence Stern, that is who liked to assume this name for himself in his sentimental journey, Yorick represents every man. In the drama, it is Hamlet who addresses Yorick's schools. Where be your guides now? While in rehabilitation, Yorick, the lyrical eye, form two sides of the same person. The royal jester may also be a poet, a thinker. In the poem entitled Shadow, my favorite poem, Szymborska writes, my shadow is like a royal jester. The identification with two entities allows the poet an inner dialogue. As a poet, she identifies with the king's jester, with every man. As a person ignorant of a perpetrated killing, with Hamlet, who feels obliged to avenge the memory of his father. The poet faces the same obligation, but her questions are different. She questions her own blind trust in the system, and her innocence, her ignorance, her reliance on the proven truth, and her jakoś to będzie, a synonym for a typically Polish laissez-faire attitude. And I quote again the poem. It's time to take one's own head into one's hand, saying, poor Yorick, where is your ignorance? Where is your blind trust, your innocence? The whole idea of the necessity to revenge the harm done to someone who cannot defend himself is also taken from Hamlet. Our power over the dead requires caution and justice, and this course was not followed. Arthur Sandauer writes that Szymborska's aim is not self-justification, but self-accusation. The poem confesses that she believed in appearance and the false witnesses. She assumed the victims were guilty because they had been punished. I show here these three levels. Guilt, I trusted that they were traitors, not worthy of names. Punishment, if the wit spots of their unknown graves and ravens mark them and blizzards smear. And truth, but these were, dear Yorick, the false witnesses. The most important piece of knowledge to come from this grim history lesson is that the human memory of the dead, as the poet says, is an unstable currency. Not a day goes by without denying someone their eternity. The present tense of this statement warns us that what has happened can happen again. We read further on. Our power of the dead requires the precise scale and requires that the court is not held at night and that the judge is not without the cloth. Here I will quote that little Polish, the strofa. Ta nasza nad zmarłymi moc wymaga nierozchwianej wagi i żeby sąd nie sądził w noc i żeby sędzia nie był nagi. We need it also, right? In our reality. It is crucial that the scale is not tipped by ideology, that the court is not underhanded, and that the judge fulfills his duty. The ghost of Hamlet's father and the victims of the purges rise from the dead to awaken the conscience of the people. The poet admits her own guilt, the betrayal of the ethos and of an intellectual clerk, and her own inability to settle the score. We read in the poem, where is my power over words? The words fell to the bottom of the tear. Words, unsuitable to resurrect people. Description as dead as the photo taken with the flash. I cannot awake them, even for half a breath. I, Sisyphus, ascribe to the inferno of poetry. The bitter phrase, words, also echoes Hamlet, who, when asked with what he is reading, replies, words. It is in this poem that Szymborska calls herself Sisyphus ascribed to the inferno of poetry. Facing the lowest point from which Sisyphus has to roll his raft, the poet accepts the plight to which, in her own words, she is ascribed. Although this metaphor was often repeated and used by critics, the poem itself was passed over in many critical texts. The raft that the poet rolls back represents the poetic credibility that she needs to rebuild. The following stanza reads, the earth is enraged. It is they who are the earth itself. They rise lamp after lamp, handful by handful. They come out of concealment, come back to their names. to the memory of nation, to rest and to applause. This refers indirectly to the phrase from Hamlet, "Full deeds will rise, though all earth overwhelm them to men's eyes." The poem ends with the vision of the dead to revenge themselves by shattering the peace of mind of the guilty and of the passive witness of the crime. Again, the present tense indicates that the drama of the rehabilitation cannot be relegated to the past. The drama rolls on, and as does the rack that Sisyphus must push upward. In his book on Szymborska, published in 2001, Wojciech Ligenza examined this poem along similar lines. I quote Ligenza: "Merciless contemplation over the blindness makes use of the situation from Hamlet monologue. The author's head recalls the school of Yorick, because now the sympathy for the Margaret is in vain, powerless to change anything. The solemn funerals of Stalin's victim are nothing but ceremonies performed by jesters. Szymborska well-aimed grotesque spares nobody, including the speaker." The sister poem, the end of quotation, the sister poem of rehabilitation is Pogrzeb, funeral, or as it was first published, Pogrzeb Rajka, Rajk's funeral, right? In English, Rajk's, you say. Okay. Ligenza gives an interesting description and interpretation of the poem. In Rajk's funeral, we have the aura of a Shakespearean sneer. Here, the assassins became mourners. George Gomori, poet, translator, and renowned Slavist, reprinted this poem in his anthologies published in the 30th and 40th anniversary of the Hungarian uprising in 1956. In his letter to me, Gomori explains the background of this poem. László Rajk was an old-time communist fighting in Spain and later imprisoned in France. During the Second World War, he was in Hungary, very active in the anti-fascist underground. He was caught and almost lost his life, but was spared because of his brother, a prominent fascist. After the war, he held a pivotal position in the communist government until his short trial as the Titoist traitor and Western agent in 1949. He was hanged and rehabilitated in 1956 after Stalin's death. That was earlier, but 6 was. The second funeral of Reich held on October 6 was a dress rehearsal for the Hungarian uprising, which started 3 weeks later. End of quotation of Gomori's letter. Gomori was there, taking part in the uprising. Here are excerpts of the Szymborska's poem, Funeral. His skull, dug up from clay, rests in the marble tomb. Sleep tight, medal on pillows. Now it's got lots of room, that skull dug up from clay. They read of index cards A, he has been, will be missed. B, go band, play the march. C, to bed, he can't see it. They read off index card, this, notice. Nation, be thankful now for blessing you possess. A being born just once, that's too great, nonetheless. Nation, be thankful now. And the poem ends. Still full of blood and hopes, the people turn away, not knowing that bell robes like human hair turn gray. Still full of blood and hopes. The first line of this poem sends the reader to the same scene in Hamlet. And the entire poem is an ironic tone recaptures the grim ritual of the exhumation. In the first few lines, Szymborska brilliantly alludes both to Hamlet and Nordic poem, What have you done to Athens, Socrates? Coś ty Atenom zrobił, Sokratesie. It is a poem about the irony of posthumous rehabilitation, about having more than one grave. In the same volume, Calling Out to Yeti, there is a poem that contains what might be considered an unattributed Shakespearean inspiration. I am referring to the famous poem 4 in the Morning. Although it has been endlessly quoted, analyzed, and described, it is presented here yet again to show how it is related to Shakespeare's Ghost. The 4, and I quote, the hour from night to day, the hour from side to side, the hour from those past early, the hour swept clean for the crowing of cocks, the hour when earth betrays us, the hour when wind blows from extinguished stars, the hour of an what if nothing remains after us, the hollow hour, black, empty, the very pit of all other hours. No one feels good at 4 in the morning. If ants feel good at 4 in the morning, 3 cheers for the ant, and let 5 o'clock come if we are to go on living. In the first essay in Kott's Shakespeare, Our Contemporary, which was published in book form in 1961 in Poland and in English translation 3 years later in the United States, we read, it is 4 a.m. For the first time in tragedy, Shakespeare gives the exact time. It is significant that this should be 4 a.m. It is the hour between night and dawn, the hour when decisions in high places have been taken, when what has to be done has been done, but it is also the hour when one could still save oneself by leaving one's home, the last hour in which freedom of choice is still possible. Like Homer's hero, they, Shakespeare characters, eat, sleep, and fidget about on their uncomfortable beds. End of quotation. Szymborska's 4 in the Morning appeared in June 16, 1957, on the first page of the 24th issue of Życie Literackie, the major literary weekly published in Kraków. Jan Kott's essay appears on pages 5-8 on the 43rd issue of Przegląd Kulturalny, the major Warsaw weekly in October the same year. It is Kott's text that evoked my thought that perhaps the ghost of Shakespeare hovers over Szymborska's fall in the morning as well. I tried hard to find documentation to legitimize my placement of this poem in the Shakespearean realm. Born in 1923, Szymborska was 20 when she heard the rambling trains taking Jews to the death camps, of which we read in her poem, Jeszcze. She was 30 when Stalin died, and 33 in 56. In his autobiography, published in exile in 1990, Kott writes about his narrow escape during the war and a few instances after the war where people around him were devoured by the grand mechanism. Jan Kott and Wisława Szymborska, together with the generations they represented, knew sleepless nights caused by terror and by guilt. As Stephen Greenblatt remarks in one of his essays, I quote, "There are books now that profess to derive principles of governance from Shakespeare's work, but sleeplessness is one of the only principles that he consistently depicts." End of quotation. I'm almost done. And I would add another quotation, this time by Adam Gopnik, who writes, I quote, "Shakespeare continuing appeal to liberal societies despite his feudal setting lies in his ability to create characters who intend no harm and end up covered with blood." End of quotation. Tadeusz Różewicz ended his poem Posthumous Rehabilitation with the words, "The dead are taking stock of the living. The dead will not rehabilitate us." 30 years later, in 1986, Szymborska wrote the poem Children of Our Age. The poem begins with the words, "We are children of our age. It is a political age." And later she writes, "Apolitical poems are also political. And above us shines a moon no longer purely lunar. To be or not to be, this is the question. And though it troubles the digestion, it's a question, as always, of politics." The ghost of Shakespeare hovered over Szymborska generation. His spirit helped her and her contemporaries come to terms with their political age. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. We have time for a few questions, both from the in-person audience and on Zoom. If you have a question on Zoom, what are we doing nowadays? Raising hand or putting it in chat, or both? Both. You can raise your hand or put your question in chat.
I did not mean to do that.
Oh, but I see it in front of me. Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to express my appreciation for the talk and also just mark and note the art of oratory, which I was feeling the whole time of your lecture. Because you're a poet and an orator, so it's beautifully presented.
Thank you.
Very inspiring, so thank you for that.
As I mentioned, I had to shorten this, and in my book it is longer. And here is the how we call it, the
Covers.
cover.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So. Look, my friends are here.
Yes. Yes.
That's my sister.
Oh.
All right, Marek. She
I
wants
have
to
another
talk.
question, if there's none.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm not sure if it's, for a novice with poetry, would there be a work of translation of Szymborska's poems that you would recommend? If someone wanted to get started in
They, you know,
really studying.
they are not as a one, you know, piece, but they are in different, there are a lot of translations of Szymborska's poem, and most of them you may find. I couldn't find one or two, but most of them you may find. And it's translated is also Herbert's poem. This is very, very fascinating if you go back to what is this? Got the name of the guy who killed Hamlet, killed or made. No,
Are there any other?
Your most recent book is about Szymborska.
yes,
Can you just plug it?
yes, it
Ask
is.
you to plug it.
Absolutely.
It just came out, right. Simply in Polish.
In Polish.
In Polish, right? Because and there are our correspondence because I didn't study that much. I loved Szymborska. I knew when I was younger. I knew many of her poems by heart, and I could recite them and recitate. But I didn't meet her, and I left in '69 from Poland and so on. And but at 1996, early 96, or the Manhattan Theater Club wanted to, because she was on a short list for
The
Nobel, they wanted to do some evening. And apparently I was recommended to them, I don't know by whom, and I prefer an evening. The actress Elżbieta Czyżewska was reading the poems, and I was leading the evening. And then because I needed some documents, so I wrote to the poet, and you know that I need the text of her speech or something, and that's how we started our connection. And later we really loved each other. She was very nice to me, and that's it. And in that book was the material, the Polish articles, essays of mine. Here is Polish essay in Szymborska.
Sorry, what year is that from? If I may ask, what year?
This is what year?
Is that
2000.
2000?
Right, 2000. Rehabilitation of Sisyph. This is, and I needed some of her text, and here she is in the getting a Poznan, I think Poznan University Prize, and I wrote najpiękniejszy polski wiersz. And here, and she every time we very rarely visited Poland and Krakow and so on. But every time we visited them, we met. If she was in Krakow, we met, and here is Szymborska with my husband.
Oh,
It's at her apartment dinner. She invited some few other poets and critics, but I like this part, this picture. So.
can I just say, I unfortunately have to get going. I hope that you will be nominated for a Nobel Prize in poetry. I mean, that's my. That's the thing I gotta say.
Well, that's
You can always send the.
that's a great note.
Here is my
Send the.
I will.
Papers.
who is,
I think I will do that.
how to say, finansowo
Financially supported?
supported, right?
Well,
Yes.
The book?
The book, the publisher is in Czech.
Well, I think the nomination for a Nobel Prize is a great way to end a great note to end the session on. It's been yes, it's been wonderful to hear you.
Because I love her poetry.
Oh, you know what?
Anna is always invited to, they send me the papers, she can,
Oh,
Fantastic.
no, because I was an acting president, last president of the American writers in exile, and writers in exile, right? So we closed it when the political situation changed, and we closed this here in the United States, but they still had my address, so they asked me to, but I don't do it. My friends are here, and so thank you very much.
Thank you all so
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
Bye.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. It's been great. And I hope to see you at other events.
Thank you.